So after a week or so of relentless grey weather, I get my first glimpse of the sun. Oh, how nice. As a consequence, I probably spent rather longer on the internet than I really would like to. And one of the subjects which has been particularly occupying me has been this label, NPC, non-playable character, which has been bandied around quite a lot, and it's been conflated with the idea of normies. Now, is this just a way of othering people? Could well be. I mean, it's implying someone who doesn't really think for themselves, and possibly worse. I mean, it goes from various extremes, and really the reason I'm even bothering to do a video on it is because the term is being bandied around a lot, and yet the meaning can be highly variable. We sort of need to know what we're talking about. At one extreme, say we have something like the Matrix, and the normie or NPC is just a sort of generic person who fills in the background, so to speak, so that they don't really have any existence of a person. Now, I imagine most of the people watching this, or when people do finally watch it, they will have this feeling that they are a person. They will have a characteristic of having an internal life, an internal monologue, and a feeling of self. Now, curiously, I've heard that our Prime Minister does not have this, that he, has confessed that he does not have an internal monologue. Obviously, those of us who do find that remarkable. But anyway, so the one extreme, shall we say, or one point of extreme, is that we live in a sort of matrix reality, and some people are there just to sort of make up the background. And another point of view is very similar, but it's based on, shall we say, an idea of spirit, that some people are just there, they don't really have souls. So this basically, and then there's the more sort of secular view that these people just are incapable of critical thought, of thinking for themselves, of changing. They just take everything on board and they just go along with it. I mean, at least you might argue that that is the most redeemable position, in that it's just faintly possible that there is the ability to change. So then we have a normie, which to me simply means an average person of average ability or average outlook, who doesn't really like to think too hard, just goes along with it, goes with the flow. And there are rewards to this. In the short term, it's what happens when the system you're going along with actually turns upon you and you become disposable, or indispensable, expendable, however you want to phrase it. So just hold that thought. All those people who perhaps went along with something which was not in their best interests back in 2021, 22 and forward from that. So it's got a bit wet underfoot here. So what is the significance of this? There's an element of what is your world view. It depends upon your starting point, what you're judging it from. If you're just looking from what you might call normal reality, and you don't really have any concept of a spiritual life or a soul, then the NPC really doesn't mean anything very special, and it can be conflated with the normie. But if you believe that you have a soul, or that there is a spiritual life, and I've sort of gone into this in actually the video before this, or one of the videos. It's our existence within a field. It comes down to the evidence of our own experience. It's not just a theoretical idea, but it's a question of whether our personal experience makes us believe or favour the idea that we're not little meat sacks wandering about like little machines, all independent, but in fact that we exist in a field which is intelligent and which directs actions and events. So that's definitely a step up from the idea of everything is just meat and mechanics, which is a very limited point of view, because there is always a question of, well, how did something come out of nothing? You basically don't reason beyond a certain point, you don't try to go there. Or the other extreme, you just say, oh well, God made it all and these were the rules. And you don't really have to think about that either, you just sort of accept it and take that view. But some of us are more curious. We sort of want an adequate explanation for these things, or at least to try to explain them. And I use this name field because it's sort of neutral. It could be scientific or it could be taken to be spiritual. So within that field, or once you get there, you do have the possibility that there are, shall we say, background people. And we may feel that we've experienced this with people. Some of us in 2020 and beyond became very suspicious of the truthfulness and the motivations of governments and the elites. And I think any observant person may well share that distrust. So everything, if we assume the field or some similar relationship, then we inevitably come to how was that formed and what is our role in it. I would say that before 2020 I was naturally suspicious of, the establishment, but I sort of believe that in general it operated for us, or at least not against us, that an element of what went wrong was actually folly and incompetence. But since 2020, especially, I had the wake-up call and began to view things in a different light. Just looking at all these turnips in the field. Now, I'm not sure that isn't synchronistic, but there we are. So another point is the subject of education and propaganda and programming in general. Now, I was educated in the 60s and 70s, and I mean, there definitely was propaganda, shall we say, or it wasn't blatant. It was more cultural. It was just there. It was just everything that was generally accepted, and most people went along with it. But what I have observed with regard to children, my own children and others, is that we seem to come into the world with a character of our own. There may, there won't be the details, shall we say, of what we believe and, all that kind of thing. That's all sort of possibly bolted on later. But we come in with a character. We don't come in as a blank sheet. So, to some extent, I would say I didn't really fit in very well into the culture. I was always a bit of an outsider. I couldn't, and I wouldn't say I was unique, but by any means. I mean, birds of a feather flock together. There were other people there who didn't seem to fit into the system as well as many others did. One phenomenon I've noticed in life is that when you're dealing with a person as individual, having a talk to them, it's one thing. When they get into a group, they go into group mode, and they're like a completely different person. Anything they might have said to you was strictly off the record, I would imagine. So there's this thing about fitting in very much, and there's a certain wisdom to that, obviously. It's just that when you're fitting in into a system which has become hostile to you, and I believe this is, well, it happened well before 2020, let's face it. The signs were there. But I think 2020 crystallised it for a lot of people, because they felt that the government was basically trying to, well, as Hancock put it, scare the pants off them. And, how is that acceptable? I mean, it's an insult to anybody with a brain. I know a lot of people may not be able to claim that, but it is nevertheless insulting that rather than enter into a reasoned discussion, you simply try to frighten them into doing something. You have to think of the implications of that in a so-called democratic society. I just don't understand why so many people took the fear. I don't understand why so many people were prepared to be part of a social experiment which could blight their lives, their children's and their grandchildren's lives. But anyway, does this make them NPCs, non-playable characters? The answer to that, I suppose, is to some extent unknowable. But it is curious that the Prime Minister is alleged to have stated that he doesn't have an internal monologue. I mean, that may make you a sage or a robot, I don't know. Somehow I doubt that he would be classified as a sage, so I have to go for the biological robot. Doesn't seem to have any conscience. Every time he opens his mouth, he seems to basically contradict himself, to tell lies. Is he blameworthy? In fact, you extend that and you might say, well, if indeed this is the definition of an NPC, are any of them blameworthy? Now back to this thing about coming into the world with a formed character. I mean, once again, I appeal to you to use your own observation, not to remotely take my word for it. But if you've had your own children, I'm sure that you will have seen that this is the case. That you can educate and point the way to a certain degree, but they've definitely got their own character. So is it possible that people come into this world without much character? Well, I think the answer to that is a definite yes. It's just a question of whether you take the view that we're a biological robot or a sheet of plain paper on which everything is written and it's all about nurture. Then of course there may be the genetic dimension, which perhaps creates a link and explains things. Now most of us come about by the natural process, but some of us in the future, or maybe they're already here, will come about by an artificial process. For instance, apparently they have produced embryos by taking half the chromosomes out of skin cells and fertilizing them with the sperm. So they've made a pretend egg. I mean, I guess that egg could be implanted in a womb, a real womb or an artificial womb. I think the direction of travel is towards an artificial womb to basically make children in factories. I believe there's already a company that's quite heavily invested in this. I can't remember its name. And to be truthful, it could have been some conspiracy bullshit. But it's sort of like, it's something they definitely will do if they can. Because there is this constant drive towards so-called, should we say, optimization of the human being by adding through the use of AI and technology. And of course it's dressed up in various ways, it's always the medical benefits they put forward, and yet, you know, when you actually come down to it, you then see it being used in warfare. I mean, if you want an example of that, just look at the proliferation of drones, and, you know, ultimately we're looking at those little dogs that walk about with a gun on their back, and, you know, in the end they will be totally autonomous. They won't have human oversight. There is the robot Sophia, who is a citizen of Saudi Arabia, became one in 2016, I believe, and one might argue that the rights of a citizen in Saudi Arabia are not that huge, but basically this puts her on the level of anyone else. Now the question then comes, well, it looks like a human, it talks like a human, except it might be a bit brighter, have a really good memory, but it's not a human, is it? So if we believe in the soul and the spirit, those two terms are slightly different. I don't particularly want to go into that. But I hope you can see the problem there. So if you're going to genetically manufacture humans in a lab or in a factory, like in Brave New World, naturally there is going to be an attempt to optimize them. Now this optimization, how far do you take it? Do you just weed out the worst diseases? Is there something like with, for instance, breeding dogs? You can breed out behaviours and temperaments. Now this is just looking at it from the biological point of view. So it's a minefield really, and then who decides? Who decides what characteristics are most useful, and to whom are they useful? The thing about genetic diversity is that you never know when you're going to need it. You might imagine, for instance, in one time and place, that what you want is a certain type of person. And so you set about manufacturing that, and you perhaps remove other genetic possibilities. And then circumstances change, and you find another quality is required, but you've got rid of that. So whereas before you may have had a being which contained all possibilities, you now have what amounts to an edited being. So now we come back to, let's put this interaction between the soul and the body and try to take it in a sort of loose way. I'm not saying this is how it works, I know, but okay, your body, you have biological DNA. Now there's some argument about when the soul enters the body. The Catholics believe it is at the moment of conception, and others might say it is with the first breath. So why, what is it that makes the body habitable? Now some postulate the idea that DNA exists not only on the physical level, but also on the level of higher dimensions, those dimensions from which the soul and the spirit are able to engage with the body. So basically, there's this idea that the forms of DNA should harmonize, that basically if the DNA, in inverted commas, of the spirit or soul is not compatible with the physical DNA, then what inhabits it? You have a living being, you have this specimen which may be perfect from a certain standpoint, or from the point of view of the creator. So here we come to the Frankenstein thing. You think you've got perfection when actually you have a monster. So how is that going to work out? Now the recent medical experiment which was carried out on the human race, we were told that the intervention would just stay in the arm. But the very opposite appears to have been the case, and in fact it's in the design. The lipid, what should we call them? I used a term yesterday. Oh, what the hell was it? Okay, we'll call it lippy nanny articles. They're intrinsically designed to get into cells, so basically they've been found in every cell in the body, and they've delivered their payload, which has affected the DNA, or affected the RNA and arguably the DNA. But anyway, they were designed to go anywhere. It's like trying to contain hydrogen. I mean, hydrogen is the tiniest atom. So if you want to contain it, you can't do it in a container where the gaps between atoms or molecules are so large that the hydrogen basically can escape. And it's rather the same with these nanoparticles, lippy nanny articles. They slip between the spaces, and they are, I believe, I think they're literally down to sort of 8 nanometers, something like that. And a nanometer is a billionth of a meter. I suggest you check my facts a little bit here. Anyway, the point is that they are both very tiny, and they are comprised of similar material to cell walls, and they basically can just pass through. And once again, don't take my word for it, but be prepared to do some research. Look at the alternative media. Try to check it out yourself. I'm sorry I haven't got all the facts on the tip of my tongue, but I've come across so much which should give us pause for thought. Anyway, the sky's staying reasonably blue, which is nice. Can't actually see the sun, but it's nice to be out. So back to the... Okay, so what we have is we have this... well, another point was that the protein that was going to be produced, the spiny protein, was only going to be produced for a limited time. But once again, it turns out that this is not true. And this is why you might be concerned about the change in the DNA. There are so many consequences that arise from this, but one of the areas you might want to look at is the autoimmune. You find that word comes up a lot, because autoimmunity basically, as I understand it, means that your body does not react to things that it should react to at an earlier stage. So basically, they can become embedded, that the normal processes which would eliminate these things are not triggered. And as you may well know, your body is because the immune system is constantly getting rid of potential cancer threats. So you may want to look at that. The term turbo cancer has been bandied around quite a lot. A lot of people, it's hearsay, okay? And yet it seems to have crept into the vernacular. People are talking about it. People are experiencing very rapid onset cancers. And basically there's nothing they can do about it. I would invite people to always look at official statistics and try to understand what they mean. I mean, basically, they're fairly honest with you in a way. Stuff is hidden in plain sight. This is another aspect of how it all works. They believe, when I say they, I mean the hierarchy exploiting you, basically believe that if they can get you to agree to something, then they can do it to you. And not objecting is a form of agreement. Therefore, they will tell you what they're going to do, and if you don't resist, you're deemed to have accepted. It sort of sounds crazy, I know, but their belief is that they will not then bear the consequences for their evil actions. I mean, it is insane. It really is. And yet, you sort of see this happening all the time, or you see something happening which would appear to make this look like what is happening. And I'm aware of the distinction, but when the same thing happens again and again and you see a pattern, you'd be foolish to totally ignore it. No, it's not that this is what I wanted to do. I did not set out to become some sort of conspiracy theorist. I was rather imagining that my retirement would be sort of carrying on enjoying the things that I previously enjoyed, and settling into, shall we say, a graceful old age, without having to concern myself unduly with these things. But it's being forced on us, really. I mean, all these things are going to have effects in our lives. This change from petrol engines to battery, this net zero, which even if we haven't realised that it's a nonsense, we have surely realised that it's going to afflict us and limit us, and we basically can't afford to approach it in the way that they would have us approach it. I mean, they would have all this lovely ground behind me covered in solar panels. It's not just an aesthetic thing, there's a bit more to it than that. It's certainly not a good way. Anyway, that's not really what this one's about. So, it's about the NPCs, or the background people. I think that it's fair enough to take the view that there are those who simply aren't going to be swayed by reason. Come to mind is Professor Matthias Desmet, Professor of Psychology at Ghent University in Belgium. He came up with this mass formation theory, and basically the story there was that 30% of people, or thereabouts, simply accept as true whatever authority tells them. 30% on the other extreme go to the other extreme and reject it. The 40% in the middle are accustomed to an easy life, or not thinking too hard, and so they just go along with it. And so basically when it hit the fan, 70% of people went with it. His argument is that, and I mean, okay, the 30% that didn't, of them, I would say that some had good reasons for not going with it. They were rational or had good instincts. Something didn't sound right. But there are also a few loonies as well who, with extreme views for which there was no evidence whatsoever. But anyway, the business of these people, the ones who didn't go along with it, is to basically keep talking about it, to normalize it, to oppose it, and shift the narrative. Because then if you start to shift the 40% in the middle, then you reverse the situation. I don't know whether this has happened, to be quite honest with you, but it doesn't move everything. It only seems to relate to a particular issue. There's still loads of things that we can disagree on, and perhaps, well, mass formation was the term he used. Basically, I suppose it means that everybody basically believes and acts in the same way, and I guess that's always going on, and it will go on with respect and independently to some extent in various areas of life. So it's a shift in one area doesn't mean that there'll be a shift in all areas. But then a shift in one area may encourage a shift in another area. I think some indicators are that I once again verify this for yourself, that the BBC is actually considering cutting its news output because it's expensive to do and nobody believes them anymore. So they're not watching. I mean, I would say in general, people are probably watching a lot less television because you can go onto the internet and you can find exactly what you want to watch. You don't have to put up with the ads. So people are educating themselves, and I think that's a good thing. On the other hand, the internet is probably overloading people, and there's just a hell of a lot of bullshit out there as well. And of course there's a lot of AI making videos now. I think it's the AI making it. I think they're just being given a subject and told to cobble a load of stuff together, and it's just, well, it's like a hot dog basically. It's made of all the parts that are otherwise inedible, and occasionally a good bit, but it loses its humanness. Now, I think that this has absolutely burgeoned over the last year. So, if you want a parallel to your NPC, a similar phenomenon would be what is happening on the internet, that more and more bots and AIs, in fact I think there's a danger that AI is going to be the new God. People are going to simply, once again it's laziness, people are going to trust the answers of AI, and to be fair, it's basically a search engine, isn't it? At the moment it's a search engine, and it sort of puts things together, but it doesn't really, I don't think it really understands human beings. But it's going to more and more rule our lives if we let it. I mean, humans are fallible, we're all fallible, we all make bad mistakes, bad decisions, and But behind what we do, if we're reasonably decent human beings and if we're not total NPCs, by the worst possible definition, our goal has empathy with others, and most of us have compassion. You know, we think about the other person, we consider the impact of our behaviour. So, though we are fallible, at least we are human. Now, I would say that AI, while it might not fail in some areas, where it would fail was in being human. Because I don't believe that compassion, empathy and such qualities, love, whatever, even, it's going to produce everything as a fake. It's always going to be a counterfeit. And that's the point, that we can either live in a human world or we can live in a counterfeit world. So there's this concept, I'm not quite sure exactly which tradition it comes from, but it's the eighth sphere. It's a sort of hell, and then it's a sort of heaven, but it's not a real, it's a trap. Now, whether it's a trap for all eternity is another question. And once again, here we come back to the question of your worldview. Are you just a biological machine, or are you a spiritual being having a physical experience? So it does actually matter. I've heard it described as a soul trap. That might be quite a good way of looking at it. That you are somehow fooled into remaining in a very limited, within a very limited range of possibilities, because you believe that's all there is. And I think that AI could well be the architect of that soul trap. Once again, we come down to this argument about DNA. So it gets more complicated. The trouble is I have to introduce these concepts, some of which I'm not entirely sure of myself, but which sort of make sense. Because I basically try to look at things scientifically. It's not good enough just to say, oh well, there's this and there's that, and this is how it works, and we don't try to work out the mechanism of how it works. I want to know the workings. So one view, or all these views which, you know, tend towards the reincarnation type of thing, or the various bodies of the human being, you know, that we have an astral body and we have a mental body and a causal body and so on upwards. But I think the concept is that at each stage you have the seed of that body. So when you die, even the physical body, there is a seed. I'm not quite sure how that works, but you know, it could be tied in with the etheric body, which is sort of like the physical, except it's the immediate sort of, shall we say, pattern for that body. There is an astral permanent atom, a mental permanent atom, and so on, that in order to incarnate, it unfolds, and the appropriate body is created on each level. So how does AI fit into this? This is something built from the ground up, but it's also built from a concept which exists on a certain level. Now the argument goes, or one I have come across, is that this level is, I believe this is this is how Steiner views it. I don't know about exactly what Christian theology thinks on all this, but the story of the fall is the story of a being at a certain level, not at the highest level, rebelling and taking with it a large number of the angels. So we're talking, I haven't read Paradise Lost, but I believe that's the sort of theme. And that's the basic idea, that this being, who we might call Satan or Lucifer, cannot supply the divine spark which makes us human. It can only supply something at a certain level. I sort of appreciate that this video is just going to sort of sound mental to a lot of people. I mean, it's just getting overly complicated. But the more you look into things, the more complicated it gets. And you know, once again, think about these things for yourself. Read the books. Well, read the books, do the thinking. Use your own intuition. So let's, okay, we'll digress slightly into the significance of this and the purpose of incarnation. Bearing in mind that there is a view, it's all a question of model. It's a question of what model, it's all just, I can't just sort of show it to you in a sense. You can't experience it through what I am saying. So I have to work using a model. And okay, I'm using the model in this instance of incarnating in a physical body. And so, you know, that is how I'm trying to explain this. So the point of incarnating in that body is actually to develop these atoms. I mean, why else, you know, to develop these various bodies towards what you might call perfection. So it's the old thing about karma and the aim of life being enlightenment. I mean, once again, that's a term which, can we even pretend to understand what that means? I don't pretend. I don't pretend I really understand that. I'm not saying I'm enlightened or anything. Not saying I know anybody who's enlightened, not saying I'd even recognise if I saw somebody who was enlightened. I mean, it's completely not in our day-to-day experience. Oh well, here we are at Brainton Spring. All this talking, I suppose I better have a quick drink. So I'll just switch off for a moment. Oh well, that was refreshing. Ooh, bit surprised the spring isn't a bit more running a bit faster, to be honest. We've had a fair bit of rain. Still, there we are. The river's looking a lot better. If your view of life is simply that you are essentially what amounts to a biological mechanism, then, you know, all this is total rubbish to you. You just say, well, we die, we rot, and that's it. So when I, let's see, did I learn to believe that I'm a spiritual being? I mean, that could be an argument, couldn't it? That my early conditioning simply persuaded me of that argument. I suppose that's the fair enough point of view, really. But why, throughout my life, have I been so much more interested in that side of life than I have in any other? Well, maybe the conditioning is strong in this one. I'm not alone in this. I mean, it's not an intellectual thing, it's a feeling, a sense of being. Now, of course, I might be wrong, and I you know, have to bear the consequences. But it's a feeling of being which is shared by a lot of other people. And, you know, there's various... I think the basic feeling of being is going to be pretty uniform. It's... you either are or you aren't. But the details which surround that may vary considerably. And that's why you have all the religions. All the religions, all the interpretations. But now it seems that even materialistic science is beginning to demonstrate that there is something operating beyond the physical. I mean, we all know about the double slit experiment and the role of the observer, which of course is totally alien to the Newtonian idea of science. And that idea, the Newtonian idea, works very well up to a certain point. But when you're dealing with quantum theory, in other words, the involvement of mind or intelligence or consciousness, however you wish to put it, in the process of physical interaction, you're introducing something which you, in the normal course of things, you can't explain. So you go smashing the atom and you find there are all these tiny bits and pieces in there. But however finely you grind it, nothing. It's like I mean, if you could imagine a coffee grinder and you grind it to, you know, your first sort of degree, then, you know, you're going to have quite a few spaces in there, and quite large spaces. So you grind it down further and it contracts, and okay, you've got less space. But I mean, in essence, nothing is ever going to touch, because everything ultimately comes down to being a frequency or a force. The atom is not like a mini solar system with little solid balls going round the centre. I mean, this is elementary, really. So that idea of the solar system, and it's a model. It has no, it is just an intellectual model. It doesn't have any actual reality. Now when you start going into, shall we say, reality, you find that you're perhaps dealing with frequencies and weak forces and all this kind of thing, resonance, this kind of stuff. That's much, but you're always coming down to this, well, is there actually a little solid particle somewhere in all that process? And the answer would appear to be no. So Einstein said that you can't, I think it was roughly, that you can't solve a problem using the method of that problem. I probably have made a complete hash of that, but you can look, once again, look it up yourself. That's the key. Find out these things for yourself and get thinking. So you know, you have to look for the solution by standing above the problem, or standing above the problem and looking down at it from a higher perspective. So to my mind, and my mind may be wrong, that is where the model, where, you know, you're looking down from higher dimensions or planes of existence, that's how you get the connection. It doesn't just sort of happen, there's God, he creates the heaven and the earth, and all the other things, and he creates angels to sort of explain it in a human way about how he communicates with people. But what about the spaces in between? and then of course it comes to mind this, what do they call it? Basically you split a photon, I mean, how the hell you do that, I don't know, and you put them at distant points, and then when you stimulate one, God, once again, God knows how you do that. You're not going to tickle it with a feather, are you? But apparently the other one at a distance also acts. So is this called spooky action? I think it was. That might have been Einstein's term. I can't remember the real. This is the trouble with doing things off the top of my head. But then I can't exactly walk along and read a book, and you know, I'd rather, if you're interested, just go and look. Perhaps it will come to me. But anyway, so how do you explain that? I mean, science would naturally seek an explanation. It wants to know the mechanism for that. You can't just say, oh well, this happens and then that happens and, well, the rest is a mystery. That's something of a cop-out. Some of us want to understand. So back to the question of why I have adopted, or why I believe in this sense of being as being, you know, a real spiritual idea, event, whatever. I look for this chain of causation, and there's a Buddhist term for you, I think. It's not enough just to believe. You need to know and understand. I've strayed somewhat from the subject of NPCs, not national car parks, but non-playable characters. And I'm afraid this seems to be my style, that I tend to expand the topic and digress, but it's food for thought. But the point is, when we start bandying this term about non-playable character, I mean, on one level, you are simply othering people you don't like or people who disagree with you. And to me, that's not the right way to go about things. It's part of the problem, basically. It's not part of the solution. Whereas if we can understand why something is so, then it becomes part of the solution. If we can understand why something is so, then it means that we don't have to force the issue. I mean, we don't have to. It's just as senseless to try to do something which is impossible as it is to do something in the full knowledge that it's just convenient, it's just a fake. So we come back to this idea of this need for truth, don't we? We're always, or certainly I, have a desire to find out the truth, but I accept the limitations of that understanding. I know that I try to understand the limitations of that quest, and ultimately I suppose to rise above it, to you know, go to higher levels and try to understand what's going on. We can just sort of carry on as we are, you know. Oh God, here we go again. Goya drew this sketch of two men in a sort of muddy, I suppose you call it quicksand, basically, and they were both just slugging it out with battens of wood. Once again, you can go and find that. I mean, basically it was his take on, he was around the time of the Napoleonic Wars, so he was, yes, that would have been the time when you know, you had the Spanish, oh, never mind, it doesn't really matter. You can look up the history yourself. But anyway, this is how he saw us, as all basically being up to our armpits in mud whilst bashing each other over the head with sticks. And that's where we are at the moment. Unless we rise above it, we need to get out of the mud. The mud is there because partly we have made it, or we have accepted it, but we don't have to. We can be better than that. So that's the reason for my thinking in this way, and I think I will probably just shut up now before I dig any more holes. Yes, thanks for watching if you made it here. Thank you.